So one of the other projects we're tackling this haul out is dropping the rudder. And you can see there's some play. So that means the bushings are worn. There's 2 bushings, top and bottom. You can see here, this is the lower bushing that goes up into the hull. The other thing I'm concerned about is this. See this pitting on the shaft? That could be bad news. That could mean that there's corrosion on the rudder shaft, which would be a real problem. It could be weakened, so I'm gonna start the process of taking this rudder down. I have to break all the connections, like the quadrant, the autopilot, the steering cables. I think that's about it. And yeah, so drop it and then see what we have.
The rudder will be getting dropped here at Cabrales Boatyard, where we've hauled out for the winter season to do a variety of projects that will become a mini refit over the course of our stay here. Thankfully, the yard is located in the very northern part of the Sea of Cortez in Penasco, Mexico, and is an easy 4-hour drive to Arizona.
I have everything out of our cockpit lockers, which is, turns out, quite a bit of stuff. And I'm gonna try to get this rudder detached. This should be interesting. This is gonna be one of the more challenging projects, I think, maybe, I'm not sure. See how corroded everything is. That'll be the real test. This could be one of the more difficult things to get out because there's stainless steel hardware into the bronze tiller arm. I think the quadrant itself is aluminum, and there's stainless steel fittings in there. So there's a whole bunch of different metals that could be galvanically sealed together. Well, you can see I'm off to a good start. I already need PV blaster. I tried to move these bolts, not a chance. And for some reason I don't have any PP blaster on board, but luckily Teal from Onboard Lifestyle had some, so that was helpful. For me here is to try and get into the, try to get the autopilot uninstalled. Taking off this stainless steel bar that holds the autopilot drive-in, I have to be able to get into here and in here in order to get the quadrant loose, so I'm just kind of tacking that right now. Alright, so I got the autopilot out of the way now. Pushed it to the side. Used to be there. Now I'm gonna go see if I get to the quadrant. This turned into quite the boat project. So I went ahead and got the cabinetry uninstalled around the quadrant. So now you can see it's exposed. I put some PP blaster on the 2 through bolts. And there's a through bolt on the quadrant, and there's a through bolt where the autopilot went into the shaft, and there's also a through bolt on the lower bushing. So fingers crossed these things move. I'm gonna try to figure out the right wrench size now and see if they budge. I'm not ready to drop the rudder, but if I could get them moving, then at least I know I'm in good shape for tomorrow. So I asked the boatyard to get me some piece of wood to jam the rudder up. So I go ahead and pull the through bolts and drop it down. So I got some big piece of wood here. Rudder is supported, I can't move it. So there's 2 through bolts, one on the quadrant and one through the lower bushing. Yeah, hopefully this goes well, we'll see. So on the advice of one of our patrons who's pulled a rudder before, this bolt, the lower bolt, is not lined up with the quadrant bolt. So there's 2 through bolts on a rudder. One is going through a fiberglass support collar that sits on a Darrellon washer for thrust, vertical thrust up and down. So that keeps the rudder from dropping out of the boat, as well as the quadrant through bolt. The quadrant through bolt I'll be able to see as the rudder comes up, but the one that's in the fiberglass bushing will not, and they're not aligned vertically, the 2 through bolts. They're slightly off of each other. So I'm going to go ahead and put a marker on the shaft, and this way I can see where it is. And then the through bolt is here. They are ever so slightly off. go ahead and take the through bolt fully out, I am going to loosen the quadrant a little bit more just to make sure it's separated. I don't want it to pull or do any damage like that. There's 4 bolts that clamp the quadrant onto the shaft, so I'm going to go ahead and back those off a little bit. This way the quadrant should split in half. I haven't really slacked the cables too much. I might need to. So, quadrant is now loose. You see it moving up and down. I loosened the stuffing box. The 2 through bolts are out, so the shaft should be ready to go. I guess I'll watch it from up here as we drop it down. All right, go ahead. Down.
Oh, that's for your set pins.
This little pitting here.
Just take the wire wheel and clean it up and see what it looks like.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna do right now.
I mean, even with buying all the food.
So the rudder is now dropped down. Came down without too much issue. I went ahead and cleaned up the shaft with the wire brush to see what we're working with and see how bad the corrosion is. The major problem area we found is right here where the rudder shaft exits the rudder. You can see this incident of crevice corrosion here. This is basically how stainless steel corrodes. And you can see there's pits in here that are maybe 1 millimeter deep or 2 mils deep, which is pretty bad actually.
Yeah, it does not look good.
So my theory is that this is like a thrust washer that helps protect this from slamming up into the hull. Like, so this is supposed to be glued down. My theory is that this was spinning while we were sailing and it probably rubbed off the natural layer of protective coating that stainless steel has in salt water. So it just kind of like has trouble right here. This is where the rudder is through bolted to the boat. So the quadrant is right here. And then there is a bushing that sits on top of the hull to keep the rudder from dropping down. It is solid inside here, but this shaft is not solid stainless steel. It's made out of Schedule 80 pipe, which has like a 4 or 5 millimeter wall thickness, and some of these pits are about 2 millimeters, so it's like halfway through in some of the pitting, which is not a reassuring thing. One of the things that's typically seen on like boats designed specifically for ocean crossings is a skeg hung rudder. So all the load is transmitted all to this pipe on our boat. There's nothing else supporting the rudder, it's just hanging off the one pipe. On boats that are designed for ocean crossings or not as speedy, they typically have 2 or 3 attachment points for the rudder. So if this wouldn't be as big of a deal because it's supported below. But because all the load is right here, it's actually right at this, where the problem is right where the load would be generating for the most part. Yeah. It's right where it exits the hull, so that's where all the load and all the force and all the waves is hitting. So this is definitely a concern.
Yeah, and so basically with this design, you can't afford to have
they can't afford to have that corrosion there.
Really have any corrosion at all.
I mean,
and
we're lucky we didn't have trouble, but
yeah, and we contacted Sabre, and this is something that a lot of Sabres from this era.
Yeah, I mean,
because just due to the nature of the design, and it's from 1985, and now Sabre actually puts carbon fiber
in the rudder shaft. Yeah, so if there's no corrosion in carbon fiber, it's obviously a more expensive way to build, more complex, but that's what they make it out of now.
Kind of an old boat problem / our design problem. But I mean, the thing about our boat is that she's very fast, so it's all comes down to design considerations.
It's all compromises.
So, options.
Yeah, the rudder is not seaworthy as it stands. What are our options? So, it's either we're going to have a professional build it, or we're going to try to do it ourselves. There's a few different ways we could rebuild it, possibly. We could cut the top skin off the rudder and try to chisel away at the foam that's inside there and get that shaft out of the rudder and have a machine shop replace it. we could split the rudder in half and then open it up and then again remove the shaft and then scrape out all the foam and rebuild it and then glass it back together. Or we could take the rudder as it stands and build a mold, which would be like the mirror image of it, and then we would like fiberglass cloth into there, fill it with foam, and put a new shaft in. All those things are doable, but I don't think it's something I would feel comfortable tackling at this point, just the amount of time it would take me, and also if I had any potential issues with the lamination or I didn't get the glass to lay up properly, it's not something I could easly check, and I wouldn't know while the boat's in the water whether we had an issue. So that is pushing us into probably having a professional rebuild it. There's a company in Florida called Foss Foam, and I contacted them, and they actually have the mold for our boat already sitting there, which really simplifies the process. I don't have to get the rudder out and shipped to Florida. They have the mold for this boat. We're leaning towards that option just because they've been doing it for 40 years, and we know what we're getting, and I don't have to think about it on passage across the Pacific.
Yeah, the rudder is just so important, and we've done boat projects before that were out of our wheelhouse, so it's something we probably could do, but there's a couple of considerations in terms of time, one of them being our YouTube business, which is just a certain amount of hours a week, and then the fact that we have other boat projects that are very time intensive. So yeah, we just think all in all, it's probably going to make sense to spend the money on having the rudder built for us while we continue doing other boat projects. Which brings us to the straw that broke the camel's back. So when we hauled the boat out, we had a budget and an estimate of all the projects we needed to do and the costs associated. The big ones being the davits have to be fixed, and right now the latest is we're looking like we need to kind of replace everything, which we'll do a whole nother video on that. But that's going to be expensive. And we also are having the bottom soda blasted, which we are not doing ourselves. We're paying for that. We have the haul out fees, and then we have the costs associated with the place that we're staying in, which has Wi-Fi, so we can edit videos.
Continue to work, yep. We have to do canvas too. Like our Dodger's pretty shot, so we're working on that project. Yeah, so we need a new Dodger, but basically the bottom line is that the rudder is $3,500 or $4,000? The cost of the rudder is $3,500, and then it'll probably be $500 of shipping to Phoenix, and then we'll have to figure out a way to get from Phoenix down to here. So it's probably $4,000 like total cost.
So that amount of money is just too much extra for where our budget is. And then combined with the amount of time it's going to take for them to build the rudder, which is currently
4 or 5 weeks.
It's 5 to 6 weeks.
Well, 5 to 6 weeks, yeah, right.
And we haven't
ordered it yet.
We dropped it, but we need to dig a hole under the rudder and completely...
I need to get the shaft. I have to get the measurement of the shaft, and about, I don't know, 6 or 8 inches is remaining inside the boat in the bushing, so I have to dig a hole and then confirm the total shaft size.
So we're going to do that within the next 48 hours, but the bottom line is that that puts us out really close to our timeline for when we have to leave. So to cross the Pacific, you're talking March. And so we're 1,000 miles above La Paz, 700 miles.
I don't even remember anymore.
About 700 miles. We have to go south from where we are now to even get to the point where we would jump off to cross the Pacific. So if you add 2.5 months, 3 months, it is middle of November now. That just puts us pretty much into a very tight timeline. So when you put that with the budget, this basically for us is the straw that broke the camel's back. So
that's why I think it's good because it'll give us some time to really focus on projects that we've been kind of pushing off, like the davits, and just, you know, we have some things. We haven't had a proper yard period on this boat in years. I think we've been out of the water a sum total of like a month and 7 years. So a lot of projects, a lot of deferred maintenance, and this buys us some time to tackle some projects properly.
Yeah, for those of you guys who've been watching our channel for a while, you might have picked up the fact that we were doing this a lot longer than before we actually were filming. So it's been 7 years for Bill, 6 years for me, and in that time we haven't stopped and done much boat work at all. I think the longest was probably Grenada for 6 weeks.
Not just fixing stuff we broke crossing an ocean too. It wasn't like proactive boat work. It was more so like solving problems that we broke on an ocean crossing.
On an ocean crossing, yeah. So this has been a long time coming for us, and I think we're starting to get more excited about the prospect of really upgrading Calico Skies and getting a lot of the things that simple little things that have been kind of bothering us for a while fixed, and having her in really good shape so that when the next Pacific season crossing comes, which will be March 2024, which sounds really long time away, but we will be more than ready. And in the meantime, we'll actually get to explore the sea, which we really didn't get to do much of. We kind of scratched the surface.
Could we be ready for March? Probably. Should we be ready for March? Probably not. We would be sacrificing a lot to get this boat ready, and also be sacrificing a lot work-wise, because we have to spend a lot of time dedicated to making the videos, and the likely outcome of us crossing would just be less videos.
Yeah.
And the videos is how we make the money. So as a whole package,
we need internet. And the Pacific, the South Pacific, there's lots of places you can be, but it's where you can get Wi-Fi, but it's one of those things where it's not like you can just set the sails and go wherever you want. It's like a constant consideration. In the Sea of Cortez, we're gonna have Starlink because we bought a Starlink, so we're not gonna have to worry about that, and we can really focus on generating regular content.
Yeah, so we're hoping we could maybe get ahead some videos so we could maybe actually enjoy a crossing. Because if we went in March, we'd be trying to edit on the 3-week sail across, and if we don't, historically we've moved thousands of miles. If we sailed 35,000 miles in 7 years, that's like 5,000 miles a year. I think a Sea of Cortez run will be like 1,500. So all the miles we're not doing will free up time to focus on other projects for us, which is upgrade Calico and get some videos ahead and maybe make some more money through the channel so we could afford all these upgrades. So weather's typically pretty okay in the Sea of Cortez. We'll have high-speed data, and it's fairly easy sailing compared to what we've been used to. So I think, and so for us, it just makes sense this year to take a skip on it and get ourselves really organized to go across next year and hopefully have a more enjoyable experience.
So I would say, in conclusion, the feeling is sort of bittersweet, I guess.
Yeah, it's almost like a relief, because I know I could push myself to get ready, but I'd be going like a maniac, and I think sometimes it's better to take a step back.
We'd be completely stressed financially.
Yeah, and we'd be tapping ourselves out, and we put a lot of work into building this channel, and there's a chance we might not do as well if we did cross, because we wouldn't have the time to put into it. So you spend 3 years doing this, you don't want to waste it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the story.
I read on ocean crossings there's like a 1% incident of rudder failure, and I think if you do lose a rudder in the middle of the ocean, there's a good chance you're losing the boat, because it's very hard to jury rig that. Like, if you lose a rig, you could get sail up somehow and sail to your destination at a couple knots, but without a rudder, you're just bobbing along out there. If any storms come up, you can't control the boat, you can't keep the bow on the wave, the stern on the wave, so it's a very critical piece of gear on a boat, and it's one of my worst nightmares is losing a rudder, so I'm glad we dropped it, I'm glad we found it, but now we have to solve the problem.
Join us next week when we first extract the rudder, a process in and of itself, before turning our attention to the rest of our long list of projects. The list is going to get longer before it gets shorter, so stay tuned for much more bottom work, an arch build, through hull removal and servicing, an update on project costs to date and future projections, plus much more.